Friends, welcome back to my YouTube channel Medical Classes by Dr. Srinidhi Kumar Acharya. In the last class, we are dealing with the introduction for the seizures, and we have seen the difference between the seizure, convulsion, and epilepsy. Now, continuing the same, the other types of abnormal muscle activities which we see are like tremor, chorea, athetosis, etc. So, what do you mean by tremor? Tremor is also one of the conditions related to the cerebral cortex, where the tremors are usually the abnormal muscular activity, to and fro activities, abnormal to and fro activity of the muscles, but most often they are rhythmic, and the problem is not related to the cerebrum. Basically, the tremor is because of the problem related to basal ganglia. Whereas if you say seizure, convulsion, and epilepsy, there will be involvement of the cerebrum, definite involvement of the cerebrum and reticular activating area, okay, or reticular activating system. But in case of tremor, basically the problem stands at the level of the basal ganglia, okay. So in the basal ganglia, we have got dopamine receptors, etc. So which are responsible for fine modulation of the movement. When dopamine receptors are not able to exactly modulate this particular muscular movement or modify the movement, make it a fine modulations in that, so that leads to different types of tremors. Whereas chorea is another term. This is also basically related to the basal ganglia only, and chorea is one condition where the proximal muscles are more involved than the distal muscles. And if you look into the tremors is that where the distal muscles are more involved than the proximal. Whereas in case of chorea, always the proximal muscles are more involved. Whereas athetosis is also one condition where the distal muscles are more involved. And we have got chorea athetosis where the proximal muscle and as well as distal muscles both are involved. And chorea is also called as a dancing movements. Okay, so abnormal, haphazard, arrhythmic, dancing type of movement of varied length and amplitude. Mostly the isolated choreas, they involve the proximal muscles. Athetosis basically involves the distal muscles. And in case of chorea athetosis, we have got involvement of the both. Again, in case of choreal athetosis, basically there is involvement of the basal ganglia area and not the cerebrum area. And we have got Sydenham's chorea, we have got rheumatoid choreas. So actually the basal ganglia areas get affected. The problem is there is no agonist and antagonist action of a particular muscle is not well balanced, and that's the reason. In the neurological disorders or convulsions or seizures, we come across another word called as a paroxysmal event. Okay, so whenever we take the history, we like there is a paroxysmal event. Patient started with a paroxysmal event. What is the meaning of paroxysmal? Paroxysmal means any sudden event or a spontaneous event. Patient spontaneously started with the abnormal movements of the muscle. So usually we like such conditions will be written as a patient started with the paroxysms. Patient started with the paroxysmal event of abnormal body movements, like that we will say. Okay, so that's the word used, especially when the convulsions or seizures start. Yes, now we come to the basic thing. What is a seizure? So far we have discussed to some extent to understand the different terms. Now what is a seizure? An abnormal electrical discharge from the brain, especially the gray matter of the brain, leading to or resulting in abnormal motor, sensory and psychomotor disturbances. That is autonomic nervous system involvement. The psychomotor disturbances is called as seizure. Okay. So this is the basic thing. Gray matter involvement is there. It's not white matter involvement. Therefore, always seizure. Whenever any patient comes to you with the seizure, it directly suggests that in the brain, gray matter is involved. Okay. In the white matter disorders, we don't have seizures. In the white matter disorders, we will have loss of function of the particular body. Motor activities are dull or diminished, but seizure will not be there because seizure is always one of the important presenting symptoms of gray matter involvement. Nucleuses are involved. Okay, in the nerve cells, again the body of the nerve cell is involved, not axons. So abnormal electrical discharge from the brain gray matter leading to or resulting in an abnormal motor, sensory and as well as psychomotor disturbances or autonomic nervous system disturbances is called as seizures. To have these, the first line says that abnormal electrical discharge. There should be some abnormal electrical discharge, isn't it? So abnormal electrical discharge or abnormal electrical activity is there in the brain. Abnormal electrical activity means there is some neurotransmitter problem, because electrical activity in the neuronal cells, so that is always maintained by the neurotransmitters, isn't it? Chemical reactions takes place while releasing of this neurotransmitter, then only this will start. So one thing is very clear, there is some problem related to neurotransmitters. Only abnormal activity is not sufficient to say that this is a seizure. Abnormal activity हो गया, होने के बाद as a result of this abnormal electrical activity there should be some changes in the cerebrum, isn't it? Suppose an area of the cerebrum where abnormal electrical activity is not expected, a normal electrical activity is expected. In that area there is some abnormal electrical activity. Definitely it will have some outcome. Okay, this outcome depends upon the area where actually abnormal electrical activity started. If it is started in the motor area, definitely we will have the motor problems. If it is started in the sensory cortex area, then or spread to the sensory cortex area, you will have sensory problems. And if it involves a hypothalamic area or some other areas, then it will have psychomotor abnormality. So only abnormal activity is not sufficient. This abnormal activity should lead to some disturbance or abnormality in the abnormal experience of the patient's motor, sensory and psychomotor functions. Then there will be development of seizure. Brain develop abnormal electrical activity under the physiological and pathological condition. Now, development of an abnormal electrical activity is not always pathological. There are many conditions where brain develop the abnormal electrical activity physiologically also. Okay, what are that condition where abnormal activity of the brain neurons can start even physiologically? Comes sometime electrolyte disturbance. Electrolyte imbalance is because the neuronal activities depends upon the different electrolytes like sodium, potassium, calcium, etc. So we can also see in the pharmacology sodium channel blockers, isn't it? So that means these sodium, potassium, calcium, chloride, etc. So these are some of the very important electrolytes which should be there for the normal activity of the electrical discharge. Suppose if there is an electrolyte disturbance, it may lead to some of the abnormal activity. You cannot call it as pathological. In the diet itself, my electrolyte intake is less, then it may lead to this problem sometime, isn't it? It is not because of any disease. Once I take the proper electrolyte, it will be corrected. So electrolyte disturbance, therefore always whenever there is a seizure, convulsion, anything occurs, the first differential diagnosis is always rule out any types of electrolyte imbalance. More sodium, less sodium, more glucose, less glucose, more calcium, less glucose, they all cause convulsions or seizures. So therefore it has to be. Then hypoglycemia, we know that hypoglycemia, patient of hypoglycemia or a patient of diabetes, so usually he comes with this particular sweating and all those things and then seizures, and once you give the glucose he will be corrected. Hypoglycemia or any toxic dose of particular CNS drugs, CNS related drugs, when they are given in a toxic dose, it may, this is again the physiological, or sometime even the stress may also precipitate the abnormal electrical discharge. Okay, but it is not physically manifested. Actually electrolyte imbalances can be sometimes physically manifested, you will have, but this stress से जो होने वाला जो abnormal discharges है, ठीक है, और sometimes drugs से होने वाला abnormal discharges है, so they are not physically manifested. But if you go for EEG, then it will be, EEG may record the abnormal electrical activity. See, there are many abnormal electrical activities are there. Some of the abnormal electric activities can be physically manifested. वो उसका threshold level से अगर ऊपर आ गया abnormal electrical activity, then it will be physically manifested as motor activity, sensory activities or psychomotor activities. Such many abnormal electrical activities going in the brain but it is not above the threshold level, so that will not manifest as a symptom. But if you go for EEG, so you can find the abnormal electrical discharge there. Okay, so but this is not physically manifested. So this is not called as seizure or epilepsy. जो फिजिकली मैनिफेस्ट नहीं होता है, सिर्फ EEG रिकॉर्ड करता है, इसको हम एक्चुअली सीजर या एपिलेप्सी नहीं बोलते हैं. ओके, इट इज ओनली कॉल्ड एज एबनॉर्मल इलेक्ट्रिकल एक्टिविटी रिकॉर्डेड बाय द EEG. ओके, so when it is called as a seizure, when you call a particular paroxysm as a seizure, along with the abnormal activity, क्या होना, सीजर बोलने के लिए क्या होना चाहिए, along with abnormal electrical activity there should be abnormal motor, sensor and as well as sensory as well as psychomotor experience or autonomic nervous system experiences, then only we will call it as seizure. This point has to be made very clear. Okay, so sometime when it is not understood, we will go for EEG recording. EEG में हमें पता चलता है कि there is some abnormal electrical activities going on, although physically things are not manifested, especially in children it is very difficult, that we will see later. So this is how some of the basic things about the seizure. Such seizures, when it occurs repeatedly, then it is called as epilepsy. Only the motor component of such seizure is basically preferably called as convulsion. Otherwise convulsion and seizure are one and same. Okay, now first we understand what do you mean by abnormal motor experiences, isn't it? So I am repeatedly telling, a seizure means there will be abnormal motor experiences, abnormal sensory experiences, abnormal psychomotor or autonomic experiences. So first we will take what you mean by abnormal motor experiences, which is also called as convulsion. And if there is abnormal electrical stimulation of the precentral gyrus, now there is nothing special in the precentral gyrus. Precentral gyrus means it is the area where the motor area of the brain is situated. Motor cortex, brain का जो है, cerebrum का जो motor cortex वाला जो area है वो precentral gyrus का पास है और वहाँ पे है. Okay, so we know that cerebellum contains motor cortex and sensory cortex. ठीक है, precentral gyrus के आसपास जो है motor center है, post central gyrus के आसपास जो है sensory center. Okay, anyway, now if there is a abnormal electrical stimulation of the precentral gyrus, there where actually the motor area of the brain is present, उस area में अगर abnormal electrical discharge हुआ, then it leads to abnormal motor movements. The abnormal motor movements occurring in an episode of the seizure is called as convulsion. So when same abnormal motor movements in the motor cortex area, when it is occurring in episodes, बार बार आ रहा है, repeatedly it is coming in episodes, then it is called as convulsion. Okay, and it is also the part of the epilepsy also. Normally, actually why these convulsions occur, abnormal motor, जैसा whenever there is abnormal electrical discharge, why there is actually these convulsions happening? Because the motor cortex of the brain is hyperstimulated or abnormally stimulated, and that leads to the problem. But actually what is happening? Normally the agonist muscles contract, the antagonist muscles will relax, isn't it? This is a rule all over the body. Whenever there is agonist muscles will go into contract and your antagonist muscles has to relax. Suppose if the biceps is contracting, same time triceps cannot contract. When the biceps is relaxing, then the triceps can contract. Okay, adductor group and abductor group at a time they cannot contract. At a time if they contract, what happens? It leads to a stiffness. So normally agonist muscles when they contract, antagonist muscles will go into relax. Okay, so जब agonist contract कर रहा है, antagonist को relax करना, ये भी काम है ऊपर brain का. Okay, so now this inhibition function is going on. So if both stimulate at a time, that means there is separate set of the neurons in the motor area which were responsible for the contraction of the muscle fibers. Separate set of the neurons are there which are responsible for the relaxation of the muscle fibers. Okay, so when this one excitatory, we say when the excitatory will go into stimulate, then there is a contraction. When inhibitory will go into stimulate, inhibitory neurons go into stimulate, then there is a relaxation. Okay, so this is a fine tuning. Now suppose because of abnormal electrical discharge, if both fibers, that means constriction and relaxation, Okay, the neurons which are responsible for constriction of the muscle or contraction of the muscle, and neurons which are responsible for relaxation of the muscle, if they both stimulate at a time, then what happens? The flexor group of the muscles or agonist group of the muscles also contract, antagonist group of the muscles also contract, and the muscle becomes stiff or limb becomes stiff. So if both stimulate at a time due to the abnormal discharge, the whole body stiffens. It may be in the limbs or it may be in the trunk, back, anywhere. The whole body will go into stiffen. And this is called as tonic-clonic convulsion. This is called as tonic-clonic convulsion. This is called as tonic convulsion. This is called as tonic convulsion. Okay, usually agonist and antagonist, they normally they fire alternatively. That means one by one. एक बार कॉन्ट्रैक्शन होने के बाद वो कॉन्ट्रैक्शन का पीक टाइम में आते ही जो है एंटागोनिस्ट मसल का स्टिमुलेशन होता है, इससे पहले नहीं होता है. Okay, now this is one thing. When agonist and antagonist both contract at a time, it may lead to stiffness of the body, and that leads to the manifestation of the convulsion. पूरा body आपका stiff हो गया. Sometimes agonist muscles and antagonist muscles they stimulate alternatively. Actually क्या है कि पूरा agonist का काम होने के बाद antagonist जो है अपना काम करना चाहिए. That means दोनों एक ही टाइम में एक ही काम नहीं कर सकते हैं. Okay, so now sometimes what happens, agonist muscles and antagonistic muscles, before completion of their one particular contraction, suddenly in between the contraction ends and relaxation starts, and before the relaxation completely stops, again suddenly the contraction starts, and this cycle continues. This is sometimes agonist and antagonist abnormally fire alternatively. Okay, refractory period से पहले ही alternatively वो fire हो जाता है. So then it leads to clonicity like this. Okay, clonic. So you will have clonic convulsions. Okay, and if it fires together, दोनों एक साथ fire हो गया, followed by a alternate, पहले दोनों साथ में contract हुआ और उसके बाद दोनों alternate contract हो गया थोड़ी देर के बाद, then it leads to tonic and clonic convulsions. Tonic and clonic convulsions. And if the electrical activity suddenly goes down, see, we are talking about abnormal electrical activity, isn't it? Abnormal electrical activity means it may be increased abnormally or it may be decreased abnormally. If electrical activity is abnormally decreased, then you will have atonic seizures. ठीक है, atonic seizure, वो stimulate नहीं हो रहा है, total stimulate नहीं हो रहा है, normal भी नहीं हो रहा है. So then it leads to atonic seizures. And if the abnormal electrical activity happens only in few of the muscles, that means only few neurons which are supplying to particular muscles, there you will have abnormal electrical activity, then it leads to myoclonic convulsions. So like this we will have tonic convulsion, clonic convulsion, tonic-clonic convulsions, atonic or myoclonic convulsion. They are also called as seizure, tonic seizure, tonic seizure, myoclonic seizures. Okay, so convulsion is a name given for the motor part of the seizure, preferably for the convenient purpose. So this is all about the abnormal motor experiences which takes place during the time of the seizure. Why it happens? Because of the abnormal electrical activity. The neurons which are responsible for contraction and neurons which are responsible for relaxation of the agonist and antagonist muscles, they contract at a time. That leads to tonicity. It becomes stiff. When they abnormally alternatively they fire, then it leads to clonicity. Sometime in the beginning they fire together and later they fire alternatively. Then it leads to tonic-clonic convulsions. Sometimes this electrical abnormality is abnormally slow or down. Then it leads to atonic. Sometimes this abnormal electrical activity occurs in those neurons which specifically supplies to some of the muscles. Then it leads to myoclonic convulsions. So this is all about the abnormal motor activities. In the next class, we will see the abnormal sensory experiences, how it happens. Thank you very much for your patience listening, and we will meet in the next class. Anyway, don't forget to subscribe my channel, and also please give your valuable